So this session is about tracking campaigns in Google Analytics. And we're going to be talking about UTM links in particular, which I'll explain later on, the acronym and what they're actually for. This session was it came about because we're working on a project with the West Midlands Growth Company, which involves getting West Midlands organisations to be sharing links to each other's events and websites in a spirit of camaraderie, but also to drive people to all of our friends and colleagues around the region. But we've opened it up to the public because it's always useful to have a reminder of how this stuff works. But I'll give you a bit more information about that project at the end if you're in the West Midlands and you're not part of that project yet, because it's very exciting. Otherwise, we will be looking at this, which is the title of what I just said. And I'm head of digital at the audience agency. And today is the 7th of February, I believe. Now, I'm going to jump straight in. I haven't even got an overview of what I'm going to talk about today, because that title page pretty much gives you everything. If you go into Google Analytics and you click on acquisition on the left-hand side and go into the overview tab, you'll know that Google will tell you where people are broadly coming from when they come to your website. And they usually fall into these 5 buckets. So we've got organic search, people finding you for things like Google or Bing, if you're a sadist. I don't know if Ask Jeeves is still around, but through that kind of search. Direct, which tends to be people typing into a browser or having it bookmarked. A referral, which is usually a hyperlink from another website. Email, which is fairly self-explanatory, it's come to you via an email link. And social, which has come from social media. Now you can get a little bit more sophisticated with this data. If you go into all traffic in that acquisition tab and then go down to source media, it will come up with a load of gobbledygook, things like Google/organic, Bing/organic, the audience agency /email. And what this is telling you is the source, which is where people have found that link, exactly where they have clicked it. So someone's clicked on an audience agency email link. Someone's come from down here, culturehive.co.uk as a referral, but the medium is telling you how people have got there. So the source, in the case of organic search, could be Google, could be Bing, but both Google and Bing are organic search. So that's how they're combined with the medium. Facebook would be a source, Twitter would be a source, but both of them, the medium would be social. Now, the problem with this is that while Google automatically tells you where all these links have come from and how many of those links have been clicked in these different buckets, it doesn't really tell you which traffic has specifically come from your own campaigns. So if you've run a campaign on social media with all your own posts, all of your own links, you can't separate out the data from people just finding you randomly on social media and people finding you specifically from your own social media campaigns. And the same goes for email, same goes for things like display ads, essentially everything else. So while it's useful to know how many people are finding you via these big buckets, it's more useful to know exactly how effective your campaigns are against that higher total. So why campaign tracking helps is exactly as I've just said. You can pinpoint that traffic driven solely from your own content. And by doing so, you can assess which are the most effective channels for driving that traffic. So you could be putting loads of effort into trying to get people to click links on things like Twitter or through Instagram stories, but your data may be telling you that actually more people, a vast majority, are clicking through Facebook, which means that you could instead focus your efforts on those less effective channels on things like pure engagement, rather than trying to force people onto your website when they don't really want to get there. It's not very effective. It could also be because you need to change a few things of your content. So would changing an image help, changing your messaging, how you pitch that content, and seeing whether that has an effect on more traffic coming to your website. Which is exactly what I just said. I have this habit of saying my point before I even got to the bullet point, so you'll have to forgive me. And obviously it helps with reporting to colleagues and funders, because I have been in marketing and content roles, and the amount of times people have told me to tweet this event and I'm like, no one's going to click it, and I do it. And this kind of tracking allows me to then go back and say, that wasn't very effective. maybe we could try this other pitch. But also if, say, you have an exhibition or an event funded by an external partner, you can go back to them and say, this campaign resulted in exactly this amount of traffic from our own posts. And we know that all the rest of the traffic came from just word of mouth, people sharing things. It wasn't our specific links, but other people are linking to this exhibition or events. So it's quite useful if you're in a lucky place of being funded. And the way we track these links is using something called UTM parameters. Now, UTM stands for Urchin Tracking Module. I think it's called Urchin because Google bought out a company called Urchin something, and they're the ones who made it up. And Google bought it and nicked it, and now it's kind of like the industry standard. It's essentially just a bit of code slapped on the end of your URL. So if you were pointing to your website, one way is obviously just slapping the link in there. What a UTM parameter at the end of that looks like is something like this. So it does look like a load of gobbledygook and looks like spam, but you may have noticed these links if you've clicked on things generally on the internet, where it's not just the URL, it's a load of stuff afterwards as well. The parameters are made up of all of these things. So I'll be going into a bit more detail here, but we're not focusing on the ID and the term in this workshop. We're only focusing on source, medium, campaign name, and content term. If you do want to know, the ID is more for when you're importing through Google campaign data. So it's a unique campaign identifier, but you don't necessarily need to use it for our purposes. And term is when you're doing pay for, oh wait, my dog's just arrived. So when I'm off screen, I can show you my dog if anyone wants to see him. Term is specifically for keywords you've used in pay-per-click advertisements. So if you're using Google Ads campaign and you have keyword, could be pantomime, could be Picasso, you add this link, you add it to the link, and when you submit that to Google to run the ad, it can track exactly how many people have clicked through that ad. The ones we are focusing on, URL, source, medium, campaign name, and content. The URL is very simply, not yet. URL is where the traffic's going, obviously. So you want people to get to your website or web page on your website. You obviously need that URL there, otherwise no one's ever going to get there. The source, as I've explained, is where it's coming from, the specific site or newsletter, specific instance. How it's getting there are these buckets of social, email, referral, organic, cost per click, advertisements, that kind of thing. But where it gets interesting for our purposes is the why it's getting there. So you can give these links a specific name for the campaign, and you can also then differentiate your links with more detail in the content term, which will make more sense here. So you can see here we have the URL. We're trying to get people to Picasso. I did a project with the Pablo Picasso Foundation, which almost made me lose my mind, so I'm using them. I don't know why. And we're posting this link on Facebook. So that's our source. Medium is social. And here I've called the campaign exhibitions, because in this instance, I'd say I'd be interested in comparing the performance of different exhibitions. So you could be using these first 4 bits of the UTM and then comparing different exhibitions. But the way you do that is by having the content term as well. So you could have several exhibitions underneath this exhibition umbrella. Guernica, what else has Picasso done? Did he do the blue? Get a blue period, let's say blue period. You could have a content term for Guernica, content term for blue period, content term for being a sexist artist. And you could then compare the performance of all of these different exhibitions beneath that big campaign title. But it's essentially up to you how you want to organize it, because you could equally, in this instance, be doing the same thing. We're pointing to Picasso. The source, here we're saying family's newsletter. You could have different newsletters. You change the source each time, going through email. Here we want to compare the performance specifically of links within an email. So the campaign could be Guernica as a whole, but you could have a link to that exhibition in the image, You could have a link within the body text. You could have a link in a buy tickets now button at the bottom of your email. But you give each of those links a separate UTM parameters. So you can see, did more people click on the image? Did more people click on the body text? Did more people click on the button? And then decide which is the most effective tactic for future emails based on where people have clicked, essentially. Now, there are different tools for creating UTMs. Google has a free builder through their dev tools, where you can essentially slap all of those parameters into their little form, and it spits out the UTM at the end of it. If you use URL shorteners like Bitly, and they even build this into where you paste a long URL and you can add the source, medium, and campaign afterwards, all within Bitly. It's also a good habit to be, when you've made a UTM link, to shorten it anyway, because sometimes it looks a bit like spam. And by shortening it, you get rid of all of this crap at the end of the URL, and people don't think they're going to be sent to a phishing website. The method I found most useful is actually just having a spreadsheet, because the problem with using something like Google's campaign URL builder is you just use it every time you want to make a URL, but it doesn't save them. Here you can keep track of all the links you've used and have a bit of quality control and make sure that you're making links in the same style you've done them before. And you can come back and copy and paste them if you need to use them again. And I've got a link to this spreadsheet, which I'm going to be circulating after the presentation. I think my colleague Lou might be putting it in the chat as well, where you can put in the URL, type in your source, medium, campaign, and content terms, and then it will just give you the URL automatically. Now, to show you how this looks, how you look at this data when it comes into your website, the links are automatically tracked in Google Analytics. So you don't need to tell Google to be tracking these. It will detect them automatically and put them in reports for you. And there are different ways of finding the reports, depending on whether you're using Google Analytics 3 or Google Analytics 4. Google Analytics 3, you go into acquisition, campaigns, and all campaigns, but it won't tell you the source medium, and it won't tell you the campaign, the content term. So the extra detail that is, quote, most useful, which means you need to go in and add secondary dimensions for those links. And I'm just going to show you this in practice, if everyone's still with me. My mouth is super dry. So this is the audience agency analytics. I'm going to go into acquisition. I'm going to go into campaigns. And I'm going to go into all campaigns. And this will pick up UTMs, whether you've set them up internally or whether someone else has set up a UTM campaign linking to your website. So it will tell you the campaign name of all of these links. We pretty much use them for our emails at the moment. If we want to get into more detail, we need to go into the secondary dimension tab, click on source medium, and see where all these have come from. Like I say, all of these are email, but you would also be seeing social and organic and all the rest. And then if you also want to what is it called? Oh, this is a classic. Add content, there we are. So call it add content within Google Analytics. But this is that content term which you slap at the very end of your UTM link. And this is telling you what is in that element. And that's how you do it in Google Analytics 3. In Google Analytics 4, which is still getting my head around it, it's a bit of a strange one, but you go into acquisition, you go into traffic acquisition. Spit out this. But then if you go into session default channel grouping, you can then go down to session campaign. And this will tell you all of your content pots, but also all of the specific UTM campaigns that you've been running. But what Google Analytics 4 doesn't do is tell you those content terms. So that very last bit of the code, it only tells you the campaign name as a whole. And those are those two. Which is that. And I know that was a quick run through, so you can come back to this slide if you need to refresh yourself. You can also set up in your dashboard, so you can add a search that is spitting out this information automatically for you in your Google Analytics dashboard, just for a quick reference. UTMs require some ground rules. I've worked in a few places where we tried to get off the ground with using UTM links, and it's always seemed too much of a faff. I've been other places where there's a system set up and it's almost like just second nature. Whenever you do a link, you add a UTM code to the end of it and you're set. You need to start with why, because this is another way of reporting, but you need to answer some questions for your organization. Are you trying to find out which specific elements, say, the newsletter people are clicking? Are you trying to find out which are your most effective channels? You need to actually be using this data to inform decision-making and why you're doing the content you are doing and why you're trying to drive traffic and what is most effective. Yeah, testing which content tactics result in those click-throughs. You could be benchmarking your exhibitions. So you just want to know how popular each of your exhibitions or events or activities are, who has clicked through the most for each one, and then seeing why people are clicked through. It might just be a more interesting event or exhibition or activity. It could be because of a particular content tactic used for each of those. And also whether you need to report on click-throughs or funders, in which case you just need to then generate the reports. You don't need to do that analysis. You don't need to do everything. It's whatever your purpose is. Key though is choosing naming conventions, because you can put anything you like into the campaign term and into the content term fields. But you need to know, are you having umbrella terms for your campaign names? Are you structuring them along the lines that I said, like you have one for events, one for campaigns, and then use the content term to differentiate between different exhibitions and events? Or are you using it more in like a classic marketing style of, if you say you have a spring campaign, buy one, get one free campaign? Is that what you're calling those big campaign names? And then you have specific instances of those campaigns in your content terms. But this is key, because if you're using loads of different names for your campaign names, you won't be able to compare your data, because you'll just have loads of random links under different headings. You also need to make sure that you're using the same naming convention. You can add more than one word in these campaign links. You could even just have one big long running word, but you need to decide whether they're separated by dashes, dots, or even pluses. Also case sensitive. So you need to pick a case. You could be spelling Facebook completely lowercase. You could be starting with a capital F, but whatever you choose, you need to keep it, because Google will treat them as different links. And I think I've already done this point. You need an agreed list of sources, mediums, and campaigns. But that kind of goes for things like Instagram as well. You could have an Instagram as a whole for links, say in your bio. You could have a specific source for Instagram stories. You just need to make sure you've got a list of agreed terms for each of your pots. And also, just as an extra, there's no need to make UTMs for links that you publish on your own website, because Google will track those automatically. You don't need to add UTMs. Say if you've put a link on a web page linking to another web page on your website, there's no need to add a UTM for that. And then think, how will you report and act on the data? It's fine if you're just going to dip in every week and see how things are performing and keep it in your own mind. Or will you be downloading this as PDFs and sharing them with your colleagues, and what is the story you're trying to tell. So it goes back to that, starting with why. What are you trying to compare and contrast? What are you testing? What are you trying to find out? And who needs to know? Now, I mentioned at the beginning, the whole reason we're running this workshop is because it came out of another project that we're running with the West Midlands Growth Company. And it's actually a good example of the power of UTM links and what they can be used for. So we're using something called the Integrated Digital Engagement Analytics Platform for West Midlands, which is made by our friends Culture Connects. And the idea of this is to draw together analytics data from cultural and destination websites across the West Midlands. And we're doing that. One way is, well, I won't go into too much detail, but one way is we're getting people to upload all their events to destination websites like Visit Birmingham. But we also want everyone to start using UTM links, which we will gather together and analyze as a whole, so we can benchmark how people are finding cultural events and sites in the West Midlands, whether people are clicking through mostly on social media, email, etc., and seeing what we can all learn by comparing our data. Hopefully spit out into things like this. I say hopefully it will spit out into things like this, because we have built this dashboard. Seeing how many visitors we get across the region, what the click-through rates are, whether most people are coming organically, referral, email, or social media, the demographic breakdown and all the rest, and where the most popular events are, what kind of events are most popular, performances, exhibitions, paid or free, and which venues are driving the most traffic. So the only reason we can get this kind of data is because we know exactly where it's coming from. It's all been tracked in Google Analytics, and we can share it among the region. So if you're a West Midlands cultural organisation, please get in touch after this workshop, because we would love to make you part of this project, which is all based around the Commonwealth Games happening this summer. Otherwise, I've got some useful links, including to that tracking sheet, which will be sent around later. And otherwise, that is the end of the presentation. So I'll see if there are questions in the chat. People are excited about spreadsheets. I'll start from the bottom. So success stories on using UTMs. I would ask other people if they've used UTMs and do have success stories, please share them. I can only speak to my own experience at the Royal Academy of Arts. We did find them incredibly useful just for comparing the popularity of exhibitions. So we could go back, we could review our content. When we're reviewing our content at the end of exhibitions, we also had the UTM data to say this was above or below the baseline. Here are insights into why we think it's done well or not done well. But again, it went back to that why of why we wanted to use that data in the first place, which is just to improve our content. In terms of shortening UTM links, Bit.ly is a very good one, especially if you can't afford a paid service, to make like a vanity URL that sounds like your own website. And that can't be done in the spreadsheet automatically that I'm sending around. Serena, how you get into Google Analytics is probably a bit more involved than I can go into. But if you send me an email afterwards, I'm happy to give you a bit more of a pointer. Someone's asked how I generated the links, but I think we've covered that, but let me know if I don't think I have. How reliable is stats for direct traffic? That is a bit of an open question. And I think it's getting even more complicated because people are rejecting analytics cookies. I will have to do a bit of research on that, Lottie, and get back to you, I think. But it's a really interesting question. But I haven't seen Baidu pop up much. Is that, could someone tell me, is Baidu a different kind of search? I would like to find out. Will we need to move to Google Analytics 4 at some point? Potentially. I think at the moment, Google Analytics 4 isn't as useful as Google Analytics 3, for me at least, because it just doesn't have the full functionality. It seems to be really geared towards events and e-commerce. So at the moment, I would keep on Google Analytics free unless you're really geared towards e-commerce. But it's good to just knock around in there to see how they're updating it and what's happening in it. And if you don't have Google Analytics 4 on your website already, you just need to insert a new tracker. Alice has asked using the full UTM link rather than bit.ly. If you're using it in a hyperlink, there's no need to use a URL shortener. I would just use the full link. That's Google China. Yeah, I'd be interested to see why you're getting so many Chinese visitors to your Dutch website. I think that's a case of trying to find out the source, digging into the source of that traffic and seeing where it's coming from, and trying to dig into the ultimate where that link is being posted and how people are finding your website. And I think that might be all questions. Yeah, and Ollie says, Ollie's our colleague and vendor. Yeah, setting up Google Analytics 4 is correct. It's good to set it up as soon as you can, because then at least you have the data there for when we might inevitably need to use it. And when tracking campaigns in Google Analytics, is a high bounce rate generally a bad thing? That depends on what you want people to be doing on your website. If you want someone to get in there and say, just buy a ticket or do one thing and then leave, that's not a bad thing to have a high bounce rate. If you want people to get onto your website and stay there and say, read an entire article, watch a video, or do something a bit involved, then a high bounce rate is a bad thing. But it depends on the purpose of each page or the purpose of your entire website. Any more questions? Oh, and I promised to show you my dog. Some people have seen him a lot, so you might be sick of them. This is Keith. He doesn't use Google Analytics 4. Okay, so you can shorten. There's a bit.ly integration with the Google Analytics URL builder, so it can do it automatically on the same page. And would I advise you not to do these for monitoring links going to your website? I advise you to do them for links going to your website. I stuck in there. Thing. Yeah, thanks, Madrid. Tracking campaigns on Google Analytics were useful to show when a marketing campaign is performing well, despite, for example, an event not selling out. Those are the kind of reasons you would need to use it. More examples of UTM insights that provided surprising and or very actionable results. Again, I can only speak to my own experience, but there are times we've used it. I've already used the example of Instagram stories, but we tended to use quite a few links for Instagram stories, and our UTM campaigns were telling us that essentially very few people were clicking through from Instagram stories. So we tried not to push so many linking stories through stories, but at the same time, every now and then one would completely blow up, and that would force us to go back and look at the story to see why people click through on that one but not our other stories. And very often it's a case that it was shared by a particular influencer or a community, and we knew then there was a better idea in our Instagram stories to also be tagging accounts who we thought might be interested, and those kind of tactics. So again, it's more about seeing where you can use it for your benchmarking, but also if there's something that bucks the trend, going back to the content and seeing why it worked or why it didn't. Grace, would you recommend keeping the same tracked link for each social channel, specifying them to each campaign too? I think that's up to you. I think it depends a little bit on how your organization works, whether you're very campaign driven or whether you tend to just have always on content. I would fall into, oh wait, no, sorry, I think I misread that question. No, so I think you should be making a new UTM ideally for every new link that you do. But say if you're reposting, if you're posting something with a link and then reposting that 2 weeks later, I think you could be reusing the same UTM link, and then you could compare how the two have worked based on dates. And naturally, yes, you could have to use UTM on both organic and paid. And in fact, it's really useful as a way of comparing the performance of both. And sometimes a way you can do that is in the content turn, you could be using dash organic or dash paid. So you can tell which one is organic and which is paid. I've seen some very sophisticated URL builders as well, but I've kept this one pretty basic. But I know Culture Consults could definitely offer you advice, but also Chris Unit at One Further does amazing work on Google Analytics. If you know him, he can do a very bespoke solution for campaign tracking. Okay, and I think that might be everything. So I hope that was fairly clear. We'll be sending around the presentation. We're here if you've got any follow-up questions. I can't say I'm an expert on every single little bit, but I can always point you to someone who's got more information and more expertise. But otherwise, thank you all for coming and giving up probably a bit of your lunchtime as well. And yeah, there's a link for feedback in the chat. If you could give us constructive feedback in that, it would be very much appreciated.